that's one of my frustrations that I've learned is that, you know, there are some absolutes in life. Most things aren't black and white, and there are a lot of different shades of gray, and we never talk about them that way.
Today on the county seat, we will talk with Congressman Jim Matheson about his career, about the things that he sees in the future and the accomplishments he feels he has delivered to the citizens of Utah in a one-on-one conversation. Stay tuned to the county seat. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Today, we have the pleasure of talking to Congressman Jim Matheson from the 4th District. He's actually had multiple districts in the course of his career in the U.S. House of Representatives. We are going to chat with him about issues that are still standing, things that he's working on, things that he's accomplished, and what he sees in the future that relate to the counties of Utah. Welcome to the show, Congressman.
Well, thank you.
Nice to be here. We've been trying to get you together on our show for some time.
I'm glad we made it.
And I'm certainly glad we did. I would like to talk to you to start about Medicaid expansion. This is an area that, particularly in the area of mental health coverage and human services, is very important to counties,
yes,
and they are concerned about Medicaid expansion. What is your take on how this has been approached, how Utah's trying to find an alternative route, and things in general that nature?
Well, of course, Medicaid expansion was one of the components of the Affordable Care Act as one of the primary mechanisms for giving coverage to folks who, before the Affordable Care Act became law, did not have health insurance. And you're expanding Medicaid where the federal government's picking up almost the whole cost. In fact, the first few years, 100% of the cost, and then they'll pick up 90% after that. So it's a way to expand coverage and access to health care for a lot of people. I didn't vote for the Affordable Care Act myself for a number of reasons that I didn't like about it, but I will say if one of our goals is to increase access to health care throughout our country and right here in Utah, I think Medicaid expansion is an appropriate way to look at it because it's an existing program. You're not inventing something new. You've got a mechanism. We know how it works. We know its strengths and weaknesses, and we know that it's a way that you can, without disrupting things, add a lot of other people to the category of having health insurance instead of not. Now, Utah has made a decision, because each state got to decide whether they want to do this or not. Utah has made a decision that they want to look for an alternative, and Utah has been one of the last states to really go or no go on Medicaid expansion, if you will. And we're still trying to sort out, at least Utah seems to be trying to sort out the approach it wants to take. So I don't criticize Utah for taking its time. This is a serious issue. We ought to think about the best way to position our state to most effectively serve health care to this segment of our population. But at the end of the day, I think it's tough to turn away a program where all that funding is coming from Washington and we say no. Mind you, Utah taxpayers are paying into the federal system. We're going to send all that money that way, and do we really want to say no to that money coming back here?
Some of the members of the state legislature were concerned that the federal government wouldn't be able to sustain the program, even though they said they would be able to with 100%, 90%, and that's why they wanted to take a different option. But obviously, when they put the math together, it just, $600 per person per year didn't really come up with much.
Yeah, and I get that concern. Look, we all know the federal government is running at a deficit. It's not sustainable over time. That's not unique to Medicaid, by the way. This is the whole federal budget we ought to be talking about, and those are, I guess, long-term concerns. I don't think that's the reason not to do Medicaid expansion, personally. I think that that's part of a bigger issue that this country is going to have to address. But I think if we care about finding the segment of our population, and let's remember who this segment is. These are folks who don't qualify for Medicaid under the old structure of certain level of income. These are folks making more money than that. This is the working poor. These are folks who are trying to make a living, trying to make a go of it in their lives. They don't have health insurance where they're employed. They can't afford it on their own. These are folks who are trying to do the right thing. And I think it's a very important segment of our society to figure out a way to make sure they do have access to health care, because I think it's such a critical part of our own quality of life.
Very well put. You think that Washington seems to be somewhat in favor of Governor Herbert's waiver. Do you think that more adaptive approaches like this might actually find a better solution overall?
Well, I think it's the old cliche, the states are the laboratories where you get to try different ideas. And so I'm glad that so far it appears folks in Washington are open to the concept of the state of Utah getting a waiver from the specific requirements to try to do their own thing. I think that's exactly the type of federalist dynamic we want to have in this country, where states have the flexibility to try to accomplish things in a way that they see best fit. And let's not kid ourselves. We should also recognize that the demographics of the population of each state are different, so maybe the healthcare dynamics are different too. I mean, Utah, youngest state on average, lowest smoking rate in America. Mississippi, highest smoking rate in America. Maybe you need a different system to deal with those situations. So the notion we're not going to do one size fits all from a federal perspective, and the notion that different states can try different ways to accomplish things, I think that's a great idea, and we'll learn something from that in the process.
Do you think that's a hard concept to get across in Washington?
I think it's really hard because folks, and I know this sounds, yeah, everyone says this, but I think folks who get inside Washington, D.C. for a while, it's like they live in a bubble. And they think that they can just solve everything with the one-size-fits-all approach. Now, there are times when national rules do make sense. You know, you do need one set of rules for food safety, for example. We don't need each state coming up with their own labeling issues for food, because the food industry is a national industry. So there clearly are natural nationwide rules that make sense. But I do think folks in Washington forget that there are differences around the country. And also, it's so hard to get all these issues right at the front end that maybe if we let different states try different things, we'll learn something from that. And we all win if that's the case.
One of the concerns the counties have is that with the Medicaid expansion, that has knocked off a lot of the block grants that they were using to provide mental health services. Is that a permanent situation, or is that block grant idea of saying, okay, we'll give you so much to address this community issue, going to work its way back into the mix?
Well, that's a legitimate concern on the part of the counties, and part of that is still an open question where I'm not sure we know the answer to this. You know, Utah is trying to get a waiver to do its own thing, and until we resolve that issue, we're not sure exactly how, at least in Utah, it may affect that block grant dynamic. But you're correct in identifying this as an issue where when you create a new program and you start saying we're going to replace other things we were doing, you got to say, wait a minute, if you're replacing these other things, are we really still doing those services like we want to? The block grant idea is the same thing we were just talking about a couple of minutes ago, where you have a block of money that you give to a local government and you say, you guys figure it out. We're not going to tell you specifically to do A and B and C. We're just giving you this block of money and you do what's best for your county, for your community, whatever it may be. And so we want to make sure we maintain that flexibility, in my opinion.
Okay, very good. One last question on the issue, very shortly. You chose not to support Obamacare as a bill. What was your reasoning on it?
Well, a lot of reasons, to be honest, but the fundamental reason is this. We need to have a healthcare system that's sustainable for the future, and what we had before Obamacare wasn't sustainable. Costs were growing at a greater rate than inflation every year, and it's not sustainable after Obamacare either. In some ways, what we're doing is we're pouring more people into a system that wasn't sustainable in the long run. I didn't think that was the right way to go. I like the idea and the goal of everyone in America having access to healthcare. I think that's the right thing to do. But I also think you cannot just pour more people into a broken system, and that was my problem with Obamacare.
People will argue that it's litigation and lawsuits that drives the cost of health care up. But I think when you look at the overall cost of the industry, that doesn't strike me as being that big of a number.
Now, here's the deal. I think health care is by far and away the most complicated issue of anything that's out there. And there's not one factor that's going to change the system to make it more sustainable over time economically. The issue about litigation and defensive medicine malpractice is one issue, but it's one of many issues that weren't addressed in Obamacare. And we've got to take on those issues. Now, there's a whole bunch of interests out there. I talk about costs growing at a greater rate than inflation. There are a whole bunch of entities out there throughout the healthcare system where those are revenues to them.
Yes, I
See,
understand.
and in our system of interest group politics, most all of the main stakeholders in the healthcare industry supported Obamacare. And that was another reason which gave me cause for concern. Because from a consumer perspective, which is what we all are, that maybe wasn't the best deal for us, and that's part also why I voted against it.
All right, thank you for your thoughts on that. We'll be right back with more of the county seat in just a minute.
Why is it that environmental protection and economic development are often placed at odds with each other? Well, in Duchesne County, they have both. Here, modern industry and resource development go hand in hand with some of the most pristine wilderness in the western United States. A strong economy balanced with a lifestyle of exploration and discovery. But don't take my word for it. Go visit them. Duchesne County. Close enough for business. Far enough, get away.
Believe it or not, summer isn't far away, and neither is Juab County. There's no need to travel far to find the perfect family adventure. Boating Yuba Reservoir, exploring Mount Nebo, riding Little Sahara. Save your gas this summer and stay in your own backyard. Juab County. It'll change your family forever.
Kanab, base camp for your southern Utah adventures. You belong in Kanab.
Welcome back to the county seat. We're having a one-on-one conversation today with Congressman Jim Matheson from the 4th District, which covers parts of Salt Lake County, I believe Sanpete, parts of Utah County.
And some of Juab.
And some of Juab,
Yeah.
that's correct. It's got to be good for you to get a district that doesn't have as big a footprint, at least. It cuts down on the road miles, doesn't it?
Well, there are trade-offs. You know, I love, my family roots are in southern Utah. In my old district, I got 5 generations buried in the Parowan Cemetery. So you hate to pick and choose among different parts of Utah, which is your favorite. But it's been an honor to represent any place that I've had in my district, in the 3 different districts I've represented.
Now that you are on, the Wasatch Front for a good portion of your district,
Yes, yes.
air quality has become one of the biggest issues along the Wasatch Front. How do the local discussions about air quality translate into the national discussion on air quality? Do the two jive together?
Well, there is an overlap, there's no question. First of all, what the federal government has done that has helped with air quality, although not enough, is we've set the fuel economy standards for vehicles. That's good for consumers too. You get more miles to the gallon. You're burning less fuel, puts out less pollution. That's a federal standard, and that's actually a great success that that's happened. Secondly, federal investment in transportation infrastructure, be it more roads that create more efficient flow of traffic, be it the front runner heavy rail, be it light rail on tracks, be it bus transit. Those are all components where the federal government has played a role in communities all over our country, including along the Wasatch Front, that incrementally affect the issue of air quality. And since tailpipe emissions represent more than half of all the pollution on the Wasatch Front, that's really where we ought to focus a big part of our efforts. So there is that role the federal government's played. The federal government also, through the Environmental Protection Agency and the Clean Air Act, sets overall standards for ambient air quality. And states are given the flexibility to figure out the best ways to meet those standards. Some states choose to even achieve higher standards than others. And so that's, I think, appropriate that states have the flexibility to figure out the best way to go about addressing air quality issues. We all know here we have this unique geography in the Mountain West with these high mountain valleys. We get the inversion, when we get high pressures, we get a temperature inversion scenario. It traps air in these valleys. And so we're in a different situation than Miami Beach. And so it's good that Utah has the flexibility to try to take on these issues from a local perspective.
But I remember as a kid, growing up in the same neighborhood, walking to Clayton Junior High School in the mornings and seeing, in the 60s, seeing the smog across the valley, and it seems like it was a lot worse then than it is now.
Well, first of all, we've always had the climate issue I talked about, these high mountain valleys, so we've always had fog, if nothing else. The question is how much pollution's been in it to make it smog instead of fog, and you're right. Several decades ago, we had other sources of pollution that were significant, including industrial sources. The industrial sources have, through various regulations, reduced their emissions to a certain degree. There's an argument out there about whether they should do more or not. We're going to grow this population in this valley over the next 20, 30 years in a way where this is a real tough issue for everybody. From my perspective, and none of us have all the answers, and there's not one way to fix this, I'd submit that one public policy area that could help is if we encourage the use of natural gas vehicles. Natural gas as a vehicle fuel has far less pollution than gasoline from oil. We got a lot of natural gas in this country, and Utah is in an interesting position. Of all 50 states, Utah has more natural gas fueling stations set up than any state. And so if we have the ability to use that as a fuel, and we have some federal tax incentives to encourage people to buy that type of vehicle, maybe that's one way from the federal policy perspective we could help.
Stay with us. We'll be back with our conversation with Congressman Jim Matheson here on the county seat. We'll be back after this commercial break.
Along Interstate 70 and Highway 89 is an area that is rich with high mountain peaks, vast forests, lakes, streams, historical sites, and a climate that is perfect for outdoor adventures, no matter what the season. Join us in Salina, Utah for the Eyes to the Sky Balloon Festival, June 20th through the 22nd. You will be greeted by local residents with a smile and a welcoming hand. In the center of it all, Sevier County.
You go through the day-to-day repeating what you did yesterday. Don't you wish you could access that piece of your life that's missing? Find the beauty, serenity, family fun, or anything else that's missing from your life in the Cedar City, Bryan Head area. Gain access to your adventure, whether it's camping, hiking, the arts, festivals, or just a getaway. Visit cedarcityayl.com for details on all the adventures that you can access in scenic southern Utah.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today with our 4th Congressional District Representative, Jim Matheson. We've been having a conversation about some of the issues that are relevant across the state and to the counties. Some of them more specifically to his old district designation before the 4th. But I do want to talk to one that is pretty much statewide, and that's public lands transfer. It's been a big issue. We've discussed it many times on this show. We've talked to people from one side of the argument. We've talked to people from the other side. We've had debates on it. What is the discussion back in Washington about this Western movement to transfer public lands? Does it come up?
Sure. It does not come up much. That's the honest answer. I learned when I first got to Congress that folks who live in public land states have this understanding of what it means to live in what we call a public land state. But folks from all the other states that aren't public land states have no clue what life is like in a state like ours. They just don't. And that's a regional criticism. That has nothing to do with one party or the other. They just don't know. And there's a handful of states, Utah being one of them, where we have significant federal ownership of our land. And the frustration that's felt here in states like ours, of course, is that there's no tax base on that land. So it's not just a control issue, although that's another issue about making decisions about what goes on in that land, but it's also a tax base issue. And you talk to people from whatever state, and I've had these conversations with members of Congress, and they just kind of look at me like they can't conceive of what it's like. So we have a challenge. It's a challenge that will probably never go away, of having to educate elected officials from around the rest of the country about what life is like here. Now, that doesn't mean Congress has never acknowledged it. This goes back to the 1970s, but Congress recognized that county governments and offer services on these public lands. It may be ambulance service or law enforcement. And so 40 years ago, they set up something called payment in lieu of taxes, because you can't collect property tax on federal land. And the federal government has a funding stream that goes to these counties based on their amount of federal land ownership. It's called PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. It's a small amount of money. It's a big amount for some of our counties. Don't get when I say it's small to the federal government, big to some of our counties. But I believe it's never really adequately compensated the local governments in areas that have significant federal land ownership. I just don't think it ever has. So, but I just point that out to say there is federal action that did take place a long time ago. At least it's on the books, that there is some acknowledgement that this lack of a tax base on these federal lands means something. And I think we need to leverage that as opposed to creating something brand new. Some people said, oh, let's create a new federal tax to replace services for recreation on federal lands or whatnot. I said, why don't we just expand PILT? I think that's a way if you want to get another revenue stream. But I'm just sorry to repeat myself, but it's never going to go away in terms of having to educate people about what life is like here.
Do you think that if enough Western states join in concert and really make an efforted push and it becomes a litigatory matter, that the Congress may go back and look at it and say, well, we liquidated those lands east of here. Maybe we should be looking at this now?
I think that that's a long road ahead to get Congress to take that step. Just trying to be on whether they, I'm not saying they shouldn't, I'm just saying I think that's a pretty heavy lift. What you can see in Congress, if you study it throughout history, is it's a lot easier to stop things from happening than make something happen from a legislative perspective. And I think that there will be many, many interests that would say we're not going to liquidate all the federal ownership in the western states. And so I think that's going to be, I'm just saying I think that's a really high bar to overcome to have legislation.
Is there something we can do to make county ordinances and planning a little bit more superior to federal land?
Well, I think that's where Congress needs to assert itself more than it has. By the way, we're ending out of time, but this applies to a lot of issues where I think the executive branch has flexed its muscles a lot, and we all learned about those checks and balances of 3 branches. Congress can play a much more significant role in helping those county land plans have more of an effect than they have today.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. We'll wrap up here. We'll be right back with the county seat with Congressman Jim Matheson for some final thoughts.
Color. It's something that can be seen. But have you ever wanted to reach out and touch it? Experience it. In San Juan County, Utah, color comes to life like nowhere else on earth. Color can be more than an abstract. Color can be your gateway to a new world. Visit San Juan County and explore the past, present, and future in a way that you've only dreamed of. San Juan County. Color your experience.
Believe it or not, summer isn't far away, and neither is Juab County. There's no need to travel far to find the perfect family adventure. Boating Yuba Reservoir, exploring Mount Nebo, riding Little Sahara. Save your gas this summer and stay in your own backyard. Juab County. It'll change your family forever.
Unlimited opportunity for adventure? It's all about knowing where to look. ATV adventures, rock crawling events, art festivals, and wildlife events. The opportunities are limitless. Pick your adventure in Millard County.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today with Congressman Jim Matheson. It's been a very cordial conversation today, and I appreciate your sharing with us some of your thoughts.
Sure.
Now, my next question is for the people who are running for office to fill your seat. And so I thought I would ask this question. What advice do you have for your successor, and what issues, from your perspective, should they work on for the 4th District?
Sure. Well, first of all, I have found that the best way to be an effective representative is to try to make sure you have a network of folks you know back in Utah and you listen to them. I've found that that can be defined in a number of different ways. I try to know every mayor in my congressional district. You know, mayors have their finger on the pulse of the community, and they can give you a pretty good sense of what's going on. Same with county officials. I find that local government officials really know what's going on in their communities. And even though I know that federal issues and local don't always overlap, I do find it's always kept me very grounded in my congressional district to have that relationship with all those elected officials. But you don't want to just talk to elected officials. You want to make sure you know people in the business community, in small business community. You want to know people in the school systems. You want to know people at the school district offices. You want to know people in the healthcare sector. I have just been very aggressive at reaching out and trying to get to know as many people from Utah as I can, because I'll tell you, there's always somebody who knows something more about an issue than you do. And I always found that all of the ideas that I've promoted in Washington, probably just about every bill I've introduced, it wasn't my idea. It was an idea I heard about from someone in Utah. And so my advice to whoever succeeds me, and not just in my district, but in any congressional district, is this: we're a republic. We're not supposed to be a parliamentary system. We're a representative system. Get to know your constituents. You'd be surprised how much it makes you a better member of Congress. They really want to help. They're frustrated by the partisanship and the gridlock in Washington these days. So am I. Washington's becoming more of a parliamentary system where everyone just kind of votes the party line. That's not what we're supposed to be. So stay grounded here. Don't get caught up in that dynamic back there, and it will serve you well back there when you do, because the only way you can really pass a law in Washington is in a bipartisan way. And every bill I've ever introduced, I always found a Republican partner to introduce it with me on day one. I always want to take the partisanship away from the issue right at the outset, and that's also served me well. So those would be some broad pieces of advice for whoever goes into Congress. What issues to look at? You know, there's always a whole list of issues, and I hope I don't put them I don't want to prioritize when I list them for you, but I really think when it comes to what people care about in Utah, I think that they care about making sure that there is an opportunity, a positive view of the future for opportunity for people. And that can be defined in a lot of different ways. But from my perspective, it means we want to make sure we have an economy that has growth. We want to make sure we have an education system that prepares our kids to participate in a changing economy, and it's changing rapidly. And the rest of the world's figured that out, and we need to do a little bit better job of figuring that out ourselves. Keep an eye on those issues that people really care about. Don't worry, you got to pay attention to the day-to-day issues in Washington, don't get me wrong, but if you really want to listen to what your constituents care about, what I hear them care about is they just want to make sure their kids have the opportunity to grow up and have a good life, to have a good job, to live in a safe community, to have good opportunity, and if they want to apply themselves, those opportunities allow them to have a good life. And so I'd keep an eye on that, and that's probably not what you guessed I was going to say when you said what are the issues going to be, but it's really more of a broad category of how you frame issues. Specifically, you can talk about some of the ones we talked about today. In our district, people in the Salt Lake County and northern Utah County, which is 97% of the population of the 4th District, they care about our quality and they care about transportation. I hear about that everywhere I go. And there's no easy answer to those, but those are issues that most people understand and they relate to. And I advise anyone who's going to represent the 4th Congressional District to focus on those issues and look for real constructive solutions, because that's what the constituents are looking for.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today. We extend an invitation for you to come back. First
we better come back then.
And get it done before your term's over. We appreciate you allowing us into your home this week to participate in the county seat, and we want you to tell your friends about it. Check us out on social media. We love your comments, and you can follow us on our website. We'll talk to you next week on the county seat. If you like this video, then we invite you to subscribe to our channel, The County Seat. You can do that here. And we invite you to share with your friends. We also invite you to get all the latest up-to-date information by following us on our social media channels. And if all else fails, make sure that you watch The County Seat Sunday morning at 8:30 right here on ABC4 Utah.